Hi, Nikhil.
Yeah,
How are you?
hi. Yeah, I'm doing good. Awesome. How are you?
Good, thank you. Ready for the presentation?
Yeah. it's-
Okay. This is your page?
Yeah. So, welcome everyone.
Okay,
So,
cool.
yeah, I'll get started right now. I'm Nikhil. I'm software engineer from Google India. So, right now we'll see about web backend development. So, I have picked up isolated topics, fundamental topics which we'll surface through. First, we'll look into resource-oriented API design, then input validation, output serialization, then look into a couple of what's ORM, JWT, RBAC, and finally we end up with looking into message queues. So moving forward, so before we get started, we'll consider an example which we uh, use throughout this presentation. So the example is online coding mentorship. There are two constraints in this. So one is like each mentor can have many students. So a mentor manages like many students, but a student can have only one mentor. So this is all about the only two constraints. Then we'll see about the tables what this online coding mentorship platform has. So we have three tables over here. One is the student. Next, we have test and mentor. These are the three tables. So student have fields like student ID, which is the primary key, then name, email, password, phone number, the personal details. And we have mentor ID, which is the foreign key to the mentor table's ID. And we have batch number, which represent which batch the student belongs to. Then we have finally active. Active means like whether the student subscription is active or not. Then we have test table. It has test ID, description of the test, date at which the test was conducted, student who wrote the test, then marks scored. And finally, we have the mentor table, which has mentor ID, email, password, and name. So with this example, we move forward. So around this example, we can have like few APIs as I listed here. From student perspective, we can have APIs to list their personal details, their marks, the mentor name, and student can have also ability to edit their personal details. From mentor's perspective, mentor needs to like fetch the list of students under him. Then from admin can do like create, read, update, and delete on each of the tables. So he have like total power to control it. So right next we'll see about what is resource oriented design. So what is a resource? So we can define like resource is a group of related stuff that we want to like expose to the outer world. So like take the first example, which is student. It has like fields like ID, name, mentor name. The previous thing we saw was student schema table, which has mentor ID, not mentor name. So mentor name is like found by doing a join with the mentor table, and we have total marks. So total marks is obtained by doing on the test uh, table. We can do a filter by student ID, then do a summation over it. So that's how we get total marks. Then have batch ID. So if you see the student, the first thing, it is not exactly same as the student schema. So student, this resources like a collection of things that we want to expose to the outer world to the users, and so that is what a resource is. So I guess like you guys understood what's the resources. Next, when you look at the second example, student personal details, I have like set of details that are like personal to the students, like email address and phone number. So why I have splitted student and student personal details? So I did it with you for a few reasons. I'll explain in the upcoming slides. So now we'll see about how to structure API around resource. So what we have here is like CRUD operation, create, read, and update, delete around the resource. When you see the endpoint, the first endpoint list, get slash API slash v1 slash student. So everything, only four endpoints has slash student. So student is the resource around which we are building the API. So always you should use like exactly the student, the resource name in the API. you should not use like create student, update student. That is like bad practices. You should avoid verbs. So the API endpoint should have exactly the name used for the resource. So let me read through the 4 endpoints. So list, it returns collection of student resources, and get has again slash student slash ID. So it returns student resource of a particular students. Then create, it's a post verb. Uh, for create, we pass like body containing fields, body containing the fields for the student. Then again, it returns student resource. I find like people use sometimes return like student successfully created string to the front end. So you should not do that. The best standard is you to return student resource. So why you need to return student resource? Like that, consider the scenario like suppose you're feeding uh, student name, email to the backend. So in this server, you do some operation and you are creating the ID. So front end won't have the ID. So obviously you need to return from the server the ID of the student to the front end. So along with it, you can also return the name, email. So it will be like less complexity for the front end to put together the stuffs. So similarly goes with the update. So update has put verb. You can also use patch verb if it is a partial update. Again, it returns student resource. So this is all about resource. So next we'll look into what's called sub resource. So student personal details, that is the sub resource. Why it's a sub resource? When you see like student, it comes in the form of hierarchy. Student personal details is related to the student. So there is some relation between those. So when you look at the sub-resource API endpoint, it get slash API slash version1 slash student slash ID. So particular student, we are fetching it slash personal details. So it is like students' personal details we are fetching. So it is called sub-resource. It is related to the resource in hierarchy. So why you need to like break it into sub-resource? One is for more readability. Other is to like when you implement like security, when you break into sub resource, it helps you. So suppose consider a scenario like when mentor wants to access student details but not his personal details. So for the mentor, we can give access to these 4 APIs slash student APIs, but not access to the above slash personal details API. So we can use a like simple if else to check if he is an mentor, don't give access to this sub resource. So breaking into sub resource helps you to do authorization better. Then there are few things called custom method. So normally when you work around resource, apart from CRUD, create, update, and delete, you need to do some more actions over it. So sometime you might need to like in a single shot you need to enter like create 20 or 30 students. So in that time you need something called batch create. So you normally people try to do like use a for loop 1 to 100 and give 100 calls to the backend. So that is a bad practice because when 100 calls goes to the backend, it's time consuming. 100 HTTP calls are made. And from this server, again, 100 database calls will be made. So to avoid that, what we need to do is create a new endpoint for batch, create batch update, and it will be a single HTTP call. Even for database, you can make it one call. Like in one call, you can create the n student records. So batch is the other custom methods. Then there is something called action. Sometimes you want to perform an action over a resource. Suppose example here is like activate. So you want to activate and deactivate student subscription. So always action has a post verb. So post slash student slash ID of the student slash activate. So activates the subscription of the particular student. Slash deactivates his subscription. Okay, to consider, we'll take a better example. So in GitHub, you under repositories, you can start and unstar a repo. So to build an API for starting and unstarring a repo, it will be like post method slash GitHub slash the repository name slash star. So star and unstar slash unstar to unstart the repo. So here, activate and deactivate are actions, but we use it like a sub-resource. We assume it like a sub-resource and we use it. So this is all about sub-resource. Next, we'll look about input validation. So API is the single entry point to the server. So what all data is coming into our server, we need to like validate. So whether they are in right format. So let's look at few examples of what kind of validation. So we need to check whether email is in correct format, mark is an integer, name has only alphabets, no special characters, then phone number is present. So these are a few examples of validation we need to carry out. So normally people try to code in this way, like using more if else to validate. So this is a Flask endpoint. At the top, you can see at the rate of app.route /API/student. So /student is the endpoint. The method is post. And in this function, if you see the first line, name equal to request.form.get name. So request.form is the body. So from the body, you're getting the name field. And if you're checking here, if name equal to none, if not name. So if name doesn't exist, you're throwing an error, bad request error. And next, you're checking again, if is alpha, if name is alpha. If name is not contains any special character, it throws an error. So this is like it's clumsier way of doing it. Like it's not more readable. Like it has more if and else. Again, you need to do for each and every field. For email, again, you need to check whether email exists. And for email, we are checking whether it matches with the specific regex. So this regex says whether the email has the correct format. So these are the validations. So as a developer, when I look into the code, I can't know what all the validation is being made because it's scattered toward the code. And we won't know what all the fields we are fetching. Like from this code, you can see name and email is fetching, but there are like other 10 fields we are fetching. We won't know. As a developer, we won't know because it's again scattered. So how can we structure it better? Let's look at it. So we have a special library called Marshmallow I'm using. It is used to serialize and deserialize in Python. There are a lot more libraries in other languages. You can explore it. So I want to focus on the schema, class, create student input schema. So in that schema, what is a schema is just a template. We are creating a template, what all the fields the input should have. So after we declare the template, the body which is coming to the request, we compare with the template and check whether all the fields are accordingly as we needed. If it doesn't occur, we'll throw an error. So let's read to the code. Class, create student input schema. Under it, we have 3 fields, name, email, and age. Name is of field integer. It is required. And it has validation, validate equal to validate name. Validate name is a function you can look up. So under the validate name, I'm checking whether the name is alpha. If it is not alpha, I'm throwing an error. If it is alphabetical, it won't raise an error. Then coming to email, it checks whether it's an email. And if it is required, then finally age, fields.int, it checks whether age is an integer. And validate, I pass a range 1 to 100. It sees whether age lies between 1 to 100. So coming to the method create student. Under create student, I create an object of the class, create object of the schema. After that, I call a validate. It is provided by Marshmallow, and I pass the request.form, that is the body. So to the schema, I'm passing the body. After validation, it throws if there is any error, the errors variable will get populated. I check the errors variable. If it has any error, then I throw an exception. So when a developer looks at this code, it is like more cleaner. First, it is organized. Then I can know what all fields this endpoint is taking. So as from this code, name, email, and age of the fields this is taking. And what all the validation is doing, you can look even that in the code. So this is more cleaner way. So can we optimize even more? So I personally prefer using decorators. So decorators provide like clear distinguish between your endpoint and validation. If you see at the create student function right now, I have a decorator called at the rate of validate. At the rate of validate, we pass the schema as the argument, which we created before. So look at the validate function right now. So validate is a decorator. So you can find like it's a 3-level nested functions. So this is how you declare basic decorator in Python. So I want to focus on the highlighted regions. So you can see like schema.validate request.form. So this one we are doing even in the before slide. So schema.validate request form is the body. So we are passing the body and we are validating it. If any error, again, we are throwing an exception. So if there are no error, finally, the program comes to return function request body. If there is no error, we are executing the create student function. Else we are throwing an error. So using decorator, like you can structure it better. So next we'll move forward to see about output serialization. So as a developer, one must be very careful about what we return to the outside world. Like we should not return password, suppose, or student details to the mentor. So mentor should not see student details, only admin can access. So output serialization is important in languages like Python, Node.js, PHP, where we don't have return types for the functions. So languages like C++, Java, we have like return types. So basically like this function should return an object of student, but in Python we don't have. So it is better to put a check for output, what format, what we are sending. So again, we are going to create a template for output, what all the fields it should have, and we will serialize accordingly. So if it has extra fields, we'll like filter it out and we won't send those fields. So let's look at code right now. So this is, again, we are using Marshmallow library. And when you see, you can see the student schema. So student schema is the output response, which we are going to send. So we have, again, 3 fields: name, email, and address. So we are not, if you look into the code, we are not doing any validation, because output is what, as a developer, we are sending out to the outside world. So we don't need to do any validation whether name has any extra special characters, because as a developer, we know, we make it right. And if you see the under the schema, there is something called class meta unknown equal to exclude. So what this means is, this is again provided by Marshmallow. Unknown means like unknown fields. So if there are unknown fields, I'm saying it to exclude it, not raise an error. And coming to the function create student, you can find there is a decorator, again, output serializer, and I'm passing this schema which we wrote above. So in the output serializer, what I do is, you can again focus on the highlighted thing. You call the function and you store the return object in the obj object. After that, in schema.dump object. So what you are doing is, you are creating a new object from the schema. After you dump, the schema.dump returns you an object, new object that has only fields what we whitelisted in the student schema. And if there are any fields extra like password, age, which we didn't whitelist, it will get like automatically trimmed off. So you can use this output serializer in languages like Python. Normally you use libraries for this, but I want to like go deeper and say how actually all the libraries work. So this is all about output serialization. Next, we'll look about into database pool. So database pool, like without knowing, many of you must be using it. Each and every driver, database driver, most of the database driver will have this database pool implementation within it. So let us look what the data pool is. So the left side diagram is without database pool. The right side is with database pool. Normally, when a database request comes in, that is a red color line. What happens is, like, database connection gets established, then the query gets executed. It is a very expensive operation because your database resides in somewhere. So you need to make a network session. Then you need to do authentication, authorization again. So if you know, when you make a database connection, you pass the host, username, and password. So they need to check, obviously, your database need to check do authentication over it. So normally, most of the application what we write, simple application, is CRUD based. So you hit the database frequently. So if you are not using database pool, what happens is, for each database request, we create a new thread, database thread, and execute a query. So after execution of the query, the database thread dries off. So we are like the expensive operation of creating new thread is like we are repeating with each request we are making with database. So how can we reduce it? That is how we use something called database pool or pre-fork model. As you see from the right side diagram, the box is called pool. Inside that, already 5 new like blue color threads are created. So database threads are pre-created and they reside in the pool. So when a new request, the red line comes in, it can pick one of the 5 already existing threads and it can execute a query. So after the database thread executes the query, it returns back to the pool. It won't get destroyed. So this way we can reuse the threads. So this saves like a lot of execution times and the setup times. And as a developer, we have like access to, when you set up the driver, you can set up like some parameters like minimum number of threads, maximum number of threads the pool can have. So when you have like high query per second for your application, it is recommended that you increase the maximum pool size. So this is all about database pooling. Next, we'll see about ORM, Object Relational Mapper. So ORM normally facilitates you to write queries in object-oriented way. So to write queries in object-oriented way, we need classes. So classes makes objects. So obviously we need classes. So our classes will depict the structure of the table as it is. So right now we'll take the example of student table and we'll try to write classes for that student table. So I use a library called SQL Alchemy. You can see Flask SQL Alchemy import from SQL Alchemy. So you can see the class is named as student. So this library SQL Alchemy does is like the class name corresponds to the table name. It automatically does the mapping. So student is the class name and student will be the name of the table, student. So, and there are like a lot of fields in it: ID, name, email, password, phone number. So each of these fields will correspond to the column in the database. So I'll read out few of the fields. ID is equal to db.column, it's a column. db.integer, it's a integer type. Primary key equal to true, it's a primary key, and we are auto incrementing it. Auto increment equal to true. Then name is of string type, then email is of string type, and unique equal to true. Name should be unique. So we are adding a unique constraint over it. Then last before you can check like mentor underscore ID, db.column. So it's a column, db.integer, it's of integer type, comma, db.foreign key. So mentor ID is a foreign key to mentor.id. So mentor is the name of the mentor table, dot ID is the column. So this is how you create like foreign key and relations in SQL Alchemy. So once you have the table, you can run a command called migration run. So what migration run do is it creates the table. Actually, MySQL, if you're using MySQL, it creates the MySQL tables for you. You don't need to log into MySQL and manually create the tables, create the columns for you, columns by yourself. You can just run database migration and all the tables will be created. So that's about the models. Next, we'll see how ORM helps us to write better queries. So you can see like select stuff from students. It is the raw SQL query. So we can use the ORM and write query in object-oriented way, like the blue color thing, like student.query.all. So student.query.all fetches all the student records. So what's the advantage of this is like when you write the query in raw query, you won't get any syntax error in an IDE, or you can make a typo. So if you go for object-oriented way, you know student.query, like if you make any typo, there is no chances of making any typo over here. And your IDE highlights if there is any error. So let's take a look at second example. Select star from student where age is greater than 25. So student.query, again, we are querying, and we are adding a filter. Filter age is greater than 25, and dot filter only active records we are removing it, like students who have active subscription, dot all. So we can like chain the query. Like Let me show you a better example in the next slide, how you can chain and build up query on the go. So when you look at this, at the first line, I have query equal to query.student. I'm not executing a query. I'm just like building up the query. So query builder, basically we are doing. ORM facilitates us to use a concept called query builder. So you can use like inside for loop or conditional statement, you can build your query. In traditional raw queries, you need to like you need to concatenate strings, and it's very complex and it's very prone to error. So if you see the code right now, if request.args, so request.args is like it fetches the query parameters. So we are getting a query parameter called category, and we are checking whether the value is adult. So if it is adult, we are adding a, if you see the next line, query equal to query.filter age greater than 25. So if the category is adult, we are chaining a filter age is greater than 25. So we are building up the query slowly. So if it is not adult, it is teen, we are chaining a filter where age is less than 25. And finally, again, we have one more conditional. We are checking only active parameter. If that is true, we are again chaining active equal to true. And finally, we are executing the query, result equal to query.all. So ORM facilitates us writing queries on the go, like you can chain it based on your own logic. So we will see, right now we saw how to query, select star queries. Right now we'll see how to insert. So as you can see, like the raw query is insert into student name, email, value is, we pass the values. In object-oriented way using ORM, what we create is like student object we create first. So student, we pass in Joe and Joe at the rate of gmail.com. So once the object created, we store it into the student underscore object. So what now we can do is like it allows us to manipulate the object. Like you can see student underscore object dot name. So I'm overriding the name Joe with Nikhil. Also, you can like update any of the, based on your business logic, you can like update the object. And after finally you have the object which you want to insert into the database, you can do db.session.add student object. So this is how you can play with ORMs. Next, we'll see about migrations. So ORM also facilitates us to do database migration. As I spoke before in the first slide, after you create the class, if you run a command called migration run, so what happens is the tables get created for you. So student creation in the red box at the below, you create student. After that, you are adding a column called age. So after adding column called age, you can just again do migration.run, and the column gets added automatically into your MySQL. You don't need to do like add it manually. So again, you are creating a test table, test creation, and after that, you are creating a column called mark. You are altering the column called mark from, say, integer. It was before integer. You are changing into float. So after like, I think it's time for break. I'll stop it here for now. Yeah.